My name is Eliza. I'm 26 years old. And until a few weeks ago, I genuinely believed I was building a life with the man I loved. We had been together for 3 years, living together for a year and a half in a modest apartment downtown. Not stylish, not temporary. The kind of place you choose when you think you're settling into something real. We had routines. Sunday groceries, late night takeout when his studying ran long and my workdays stretched past dinner. Shared laundry, shared bills, shared silences that felt comfortable instead of empty. At least that's what I thought they were. The first crack didn't come with shouting or accusations. It came quietly, 2 weeks before his graduation. I noticed it because he stopped giving details. Every time I asked about the ceremony, times, seating, where his parents would sit, he'd change the subject. Too quickly, too smoothly, like he'd rehearsed avoidance the same way he'd rehearsed exam answers. At first, I told myself I was overthinking. He was under pressure. Finals, family expectations, everything colliding at once. I tried to be understanding. I always tried to be understanding. One morning, we were sitting at the kitchen counter with coffee between us. His laptop was open, inbox overflowing with unread emails. Mine was face down, buzzing softly with work notifications I was ignoring. "So," I said casually, scrolling through my calendar. "Saturday at 2, right? Do you want me to grab flowers for your mom beforehand, or should we get them together?" His spoon froze mid-stir. Coffee sloshed against the side of the mug. He didn't look at me. "Actually," he said, stirring harder than necessary, "maybe it's better if you don't come." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because my brain hadn't caught up to what my ears had just heard. "What?" "It's going to be crowded," he said quickly. "Limited seating, family stuff. You know how these things are." I set my phone down. "We've been planning this for months," I said. "I took the day off work." He shrugged, not dismissively, just vaguely. Like this was inconvenient, but not important enough to justify a real explanation. "I just think it'll be less stressful this way." That was the moment something shifted. He still wouldn't look at me. I didn't push. Not yet. I nodded, even smiled a little, and told myself there had to be a reason that made sense, that he'd explain later. That relationships required flexibility. I didn't realize then that flexibility, in his world, only bent in one direction. The days after that felt colder, not openly hostile, just distant, like I was sharing space with someone who had already half left. He'd come home from studying and go straight to his phone. His laughs were shorter now, quieter, and never aimed at me. When I reached for his hand during a movie, he let me hold it for a few seconds before gently pulling away, like he'd forgotten something important elsewhere. "Did your professor like your final project?" I asked one night. "Yeah." "Want to celebrate?" I said carefully. "We could go to that Italian place you like." "I'm tired." "Okay," I replied, keeping my voice light. "Another night." He didn't answer. I told myself I was being patient, mature, supportive. I didn't see yet that I was slowly disappearing. 2 days later, his parents came over for dinner. I had met them maybe 5 times in 3 years, always brief encounters, always polite in a way that felt practiced rather than warm. I made lasagna, set the table properly, changed into something neutral, nothing flashy, nothing that could be criticized. He was tense the entire evening, laughing too loudly at his father's bland comments about the weather. His mother barely spoke to me at all. "So," his father said, cutting into his food with surgical precision, "you work in administration, right?" "I manage systems," I corrected calmly. He nodded, like that confirmed something unfortunate. "His ex, Claire, went into consulting," his mother added, as if continuing a conversation already in progress. "Very driven, always had a plan." The air shifted. I felt my boyfriend stiffen beside me, but he said nothing. "She just bought a place near campus," his father continued. "Her family's very proud." I set my fork down. "I'm sitting right here," I said quietly. They finally looked at me. "No offense intended," his mother replied coolly. The rest of the evening blurred together. Comparisons disguised as compliments, memories framed as nostalgia, the same message repeating itself over and over. "This is who we wanted. This is not you." When I finally confronted it, when I asked why I was being compared to a woman he supposedly no longer loved, my boyfriend didn't defend me. He didn't even argue. "It's my parents' apartment," he said softly when things escalated, like that settled everything. The table went silent. They left shortly after. His mother hugged him tightly and didn't acknowledge me at all. When the door closed behind them, I waited. He started doing the dishes instead. Too fast. Plates clattering, movements sharp and restless. "Are you going to talk about what just happened?" I asked. "They're old-fashioned," he said. "They don't mean anything by it." I watched him scrub a plate that was already clean, That was when I realized something terrifying. He wasn't choosing sides. He had already chosen. And it wasn't me. I didn't know it yet, but the invitation I never received wasn't just about a graduation ceremony. It was about where I stood in his life. And I was much further outside than I had ever allowed myself to see. The thing about silence is that it doesn't disappear when the room empties. It lingers. After his parents left, the apartment felt smaller, like the walls had shifted inward, pressing against my ribs. I stayed seated at the table for a few seconds longer than necessary, staring at the place where his mother's napkin still rested, folded with unnecessary precision. He stacked plates at the sink, too loudly, too carefully. The sound of porcelain knocking against porcelain filled the space where a conversation should have been. I waited. I'd learned how to wait with him. "Do you want help?" I asked finally. "No," he said without turning around. I stood anyway and joined him. It felt wrong to sit while he cleaned. Wrong to act like nothing had happened. Wrong to pretend the words at that table hadn't landed exactly where they were meant to. "They compared me to her," I said, keeping my voice steady, right in front of me. He sighed, long and tired, like I'd just asked him to solve a problem he'd already decided to ignore. "They weren't trying to hurt you. They talked about her buying a house. They're proud of her," he said. "That's all. And what are they of me?" That made him pause, just for a second. Long enough for me to see it register, and then slide away. "Eliza," he said carefully, "you're taking this personally." I let out a small, humorless laugh. "They brought up your ex at our dinner table." "They're old," he repeated, like age explained cruelty. "They don't think before they speak." I looked at him then, really looked, at the way his shoulders were hunched, his eyes fixed on the sink, his body angled away from me as if proximity itself was uncomfortable. "How long have they felt this way?" I asked. He didn't answer. "How long have they not liked me?" He kept washing. The water ran. Plates clinked. The question hung there, unanswered, like it had always been. "Say it," I pressed. "I need you to say it." He turned the faucet off with more force than necessary. "What do you want me to say?" he snapped. "That my parents don't think you're right for me? That they think I could do better? That they've always preferred Claire?" There it was, out in the open, stripped of politeness and pretense. My chest tightened, but my voice didn't shake. "And you?" His silence this time was different. He didn't rush to fill it. "I didn't want to deal with it," he said finally. "Their opinions, their pressure. So instead of standing up for me," I said slowly, "you just hid me. That's not fair." "It's exactly fair." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I was trying to protect you." "No," I said. "You were protecting yourself from having to choose." He turned back to the sink, ending the conversation without ending it. That night he went to bed early, or at least he said he was tired. I lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing, even out, staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction I'd ever had with his parents, every holiday invitation that came late or not at all, every photo posted without me in it, every event he attended alone while I told myself it was normal. I had confused exclusion with independence. The next few days blurred together. He stayed out later, studied longer, spent more time at the library. When he came home, he went straight to the bedroom, phone in hand, voice low, turned away from me. When I asked how his day went, he gave me summaries instead of stories. "Fine. Busy. Tired." I told myself finals were intense, that stress made people withdraw, that love meant patience. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m. The bed beside me was empty. Light leaked from under the bathroom door. I heard his laugh. Soft, quiet, the laugh he used to save for me. I lay there, heart racing, listening. Not to the words, just the tone. Intimate, relaxed, familiar. When he came back to bed, I pretended to be asleep. The next morning, I asked casually, "Who were you texting last night?" He didn't even hesitate. "A classmate. She's freaking out about her presentation." "At 2 a.m? He looked annoyed now. "Why are you interrogating me?" "I'm not." "You are." I let it go. The morning of his graduation arrived faster than I expected. I woke up to the sound of drawers opening and closing. He was already dressed, hair done, suit pressed. He looked happy, lighter than he had in weeks. His phone buzzed. He smiled at the screen. I watched from the bed, a strange calm settling over me. "You look nice," I said. "Thanks," he replied, barely glancing up. I sat up. "Are we really not going to talk about this?" He sighed, like I was exhausting him before the day had even started. "Talk about what?" "About me not being there, about your parents, about Claire." That did it. He set his phone down with a sharp click and finally looked at me. "Fine," he said. "You want honesty?" I nodded. "My parents don't like you," he said bluntly. They don't think you're good enough for me. They think I'm wasting my time. They think Claire was a better match, financially, socially, everything. Each word landed cleanly, efficiently, like he'd rehearsed them. And honestly, he added, grabbing his jacket, sometimes I think they might be right. The room went very still. I felt something detach inside me. Not break, not shatter, just disconnect. I understand, I said. He blinked, thrown off. What? I understand, I repeated calmly. You should go. Don't want to be late. He stared at me, waiting for anger. Tears. A fight. Something to make this easier on him. When it didn't come, he scoffed. That's it? What do you want me to say? I asked. You just told me everything I needed to know. I'm just being honest. There's honesty, I said quietly, and there's cruelty. He hesitated. For a moment, it looked like he might say something else. Then he turned and walked out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the picture frames. I sat there for 5 minutes after he left. Then I stood up. I packed for 3 hours. Clothes first, then books, then personal documents. The things that mattered, the things that were mine. The apartment wasn't in my name. His parents had paid for it. I'd paid half the rent, but my name had never been on the lease, just like it had never been fully in his life. When I finished loading my car, the apartment looked hollow, like a stage after the actors had left. I placed my keys on the counter. Next to them, a note. Good luck with everything. And then I walked out. I didn't cry when I closed the door behind me. That surprised me later, when I had time to think about it. But in that moment, standing in the hallway with my bag over my shoulder and my keys no longer in my pocket, I felt strangely steady. Like my body had already accepted what my heart had been slow to admit. I drove across town without music, without checking my phone. The city lights blurred past the windshield. Familiar streets suddenly unfamiliar now that I wasn't heading back to him. Leo lived in a small apartment near the edge of downtown. He'd been my friend long before he was ever his friend. When he opened the door and saw my face, he didn't ask questions right away. You okay? He asked. I needed somewhere to stay, I said. That answers it. He helped me carry my bags inside. Set them down in the spare room like this was normal. Like I hadn't just walked out of a life I thought I was building. What happened? He asked once we were sitting on the couch, pizza boxes between us. I wasn't invited to his graduation, I said simply. Leo blinked. What? His parents don't like me, I added. They like his ex. Leo stared at me for a long moment. And he let that happen? Yes. And you left? Yes. He leaned back, ran a hand over his face. Jesus, Eliza. What else was I supposed to do? He didn't have an answer. Around 7 that evening, my phone started vibrating like it was alive. Missed calls. Texts stacking so fast I didn't bother opening them. Where are you? This isn't funny. Your stuff is gone. Answer me. My parents are asking where you are. I turned my phone face down and went back to eating pizza that tasted like cardboard. Angry wasn't the right word. Sad didn't quite fit either. Mostly I felt exhausted. Around 9, an unfamiliar number popped up on my screen. I hesitated, then answered. Eliza, a man's voice said. Tight, controlled. It's his father. I closed my eyes. Where are you? He asked. He's very upset. He came home from the ceremony and... You mean from the ceremony I wasn't invited to? I interrupted quietly. There was a pause, a recalibration. We need to talk, he said. This has gotten out of hand. I don't think it has, I replied. I think it finally made sense. Eliza, he said, voice lowering. I know we may not have always been welcoming. You compared me to his ex at my own dinner table, I said. You ignored me in my own home. Our concerns were never personal. They were entirely personal. Another pause. He says you think he's ashamed of you, his father continued. That's not true. He didn't invite me to his graduation, I said. Think about what that means. Running away isn't the solution. I'm not running away, I said evenly. I'm walking away from a relationship where I was never going to be enough. Please, he said. He's confused. He didn't mean... He meant it, I said. And he meant it for 3 years. I hung up before he could say anything else. 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was his mother's number. Eliza, she said, her voice trembling. Please talk to him. He made a mistake. I wasn't a mistake, I said softly. I was a choice. One he didn't make. She started crying. I ended the call. Then came his texts. Please come back. I shouldn't have said those things. I was stressed. I love you. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed one sentence. If you loved me, you would have defended me once. I turned my phone off. Leo found me on the couch near midnight. You good? He asked. I don't know, I said honestly. He handed me a glass of water. For what it's worth, you didn't do anything wrong. I nodded. I believed him. mostly. The next morning, I turned my phone back on. 47 notifications, most from him. One from a number I recognized. Claire. Hey, his parents gave me your number. I don't know what happened, but he's really messed up. Maybe you should talk to him. I stared at the message until my chest tightened. They had given his ex my number to fix what they had broken. I blocked her. Then I blocked his parents. And finally, after staring at his contact photo longer than I wanted to admit, I blocked him too. That was the moment I knew. I hadn't just left an apartment. I had left a future that was never meant to include me. The first few days after I blocked him felt unreal. Not dramatic, not explosive, just hollow. I stayed at Leo's place, sleeping in a room that still smelled faintly of cardboard boxes and old laundry detergent. I went to work like nothing had happened. Answered emails, sat in meetings, smiled when people asked how my week was going. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I wasn't ready to explain how a relationship could end without a fight, without cheating, without a single moment that screamed, "This is over." It was over because of everything that didn't happen. Because of every time he stayed quiet. Every time he let someone else define my worth. Every time he chose the path of least resistance and left me standing alone on the other side of it. By the end of the week, the anger finally arrived. It wasn't loud. It didn't make me cry or throw things. It sat heavy in my chest, tightening every time I replayed that morning in my head. The way he'd said it so easily. Sometimes I think they might be right. As if my value was something to be debated. Leo noticed the shift before I did. "You've been quiet," he said one evening, handing me a takeout bag. Quiet, quiet. Not normal quiet. "I'm fine," I said automatically. He raised an eyebrow. "You're allowed to be mad, you know." "I know," I said. And I did. I just didn't know where to put it yet. 2 days later, Leo came home from work looking uncomfortable. "There's something I should probably tell you," he said. My stomach dropped. "What?" "He showed up at my office today." I stared at him. "What do you mean, showed up?" "He waited in the lobby," Leo said. "Asked for you. Said it was urgent." "And?" "I told him I didn't know where you were." That was a lie. We both knew it. And the fact that Leo had told it anyway did something strange to my chest. Something like relief. "He didn't take it well," Leo added. "He looked rough, Eliza, like he hadn't slept." I nodded slowly. "What did he say?" "That he messed up," Leo said. "That he was going to fix it. That he chose you." The words hit differently than I expected. Not relief, not hope. Just a dull, distant ache. "That doesn't matter," I said quietly. Leo studied my face. "You sure?" "Yes. Because choosing me after losing me wasn't choosing me at all." That night, I checked my email for the first time since I'd left. His name sat at the top of my inbox. "Subject, please read." I didn't open it right away. I stared at the screen for a long time, my finger hovering over the trackpad, my heart strangely calm. When I finally clicked, the message filled the screen. It was long, longer than anything he'd ever written me before. He apologized, over and over again, said he'd been scared, said he'd been under pressure, said he hadn't realized how much he'd hurt me until the apartment was empty. He told me he'd confronted his parents, that he'd told them they were wrong about me, that he'd told them he loved me, and that if they couldn't accept that, he would choose me anyway. He said his father had gone silent, that his mother had cried, that for the first time he'd stood his ground. He wrote that he'd blocked Claire, that he'd told her not to contact him again, that he finally understood what he was about to lose. "I'm not asking you to come back," he wrote near the end. "I just need you to know I'm sorry, that you deserved better than what I gave you." I read the email 3 times. Then I closed my laptop. I didn't cry. I didn't feel satisfaction, or vindication, or even relief. I felt tired, because everything he promised me now was everything I had needed him to do before. A week passed, then another. The sharp edges of my anger dulled, the constant replaying of old conversations slowed. I started going on long walks after work, cooking meals instead of eating takeout, reclaiming small parts of myself that had been put on hold while I tried to be someone easier to accept. I didn't reply to the email. I didn't block him either. I just let it sit there, unanswered, unresolved. A month after I left, I ran into him by accident. It was a coffee shop near my office, one I rarely went to, but that day I'd needed caffeine more than routine. I saw him before he saw me. He looked different, thinner, tired, like someone who had been carrying something heavy without knowing where to put it. When he noticed me, his face changed instantly. "Eliza," he said softly, standing up too quickly. I nodded. "Hi." There was an awkward pause, the kind that stretches when 2 people are standing in the space where a past version of them once existed. "How are you?" he asked. "I'm okay," I said, and I meant it. He swallowed. "I read your message." I didn't send one. He nodded. I know. We stood there, neither of us sure what to say next. I'm going to therapy, he said suddenly. I needed to. I didn't realize how much I let my parents control my decisions. That's good, I replied. I'm glad. He looked at me like he was searching for something. Hope, maybe. Or permission. I meant everything I wrote, he said quietly. I know, I said. Another pause. Well, I said finally, I should go. Yeah, he agreed. Of course. As I turned to leave, he spoke again. Eliza? I stopped. For what it's worth, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, you were always enough. I looked at him then. Really looked. I know, I said. And then I walked away. After that coffee shop encounter, something shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone else would notice, but inside me, a quiet door closed. I didn't think about him when I woke up anymore. I didn't replay conversations in the shower or imagine alternate endings while brushing my teeth. His name stopped floating to the surface during idle moments. When it did appear, it felt distant, like recalling a classmate from years ago rather than someone who had once shared my bed. That was new. I moved out of Leo's place 2 weeks later into a small studio near my office. It wasn't much. One room, thin walls, a window that looked out over a brick alley. But it was mine. Every decision inside that space belonged to me. Where the couch went, which mug I reached for in the morning, what music played while I cooked. The first night there, I slept better than I had in months. Work became easier, or maybe I became lighter. I took on projects I'd been putting off, said yes more often, laughed without checking my phone afterward, half expecting a message that would pull me back into something unresolved. He didn't reach out again. I noticed that too. Not with disappointment, but with relief. About 6 weeks after I left, Leo invited me to a small get-together. Nothing dramatic, just a few friends, cheap wine, a living room crowded with familiar faces and overlapping conversations. That's where I met Evan. He wasn't remarkable in the way movies like to pretend people are. No instant spark, no cinematic slow-motion introduction. He was just present, comfortable. He asked questions and waited for the answers. When I spoke, he listened without scanning the room for something better. We talked about work, about music, about nothing that mattered and everything that did. When he asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime, I surprised myself by saying yes without hesitation. It wasn't betrayal. It wasn't replacement. It was permission. We took things slowly, on purpose. No late-night confessions, no grand declarations, just shared walks, easy laughter, a sense that I didn't have to audition for space in his life. He never asked why my last relationship ended. Not at first. When he eventually did, it wasn't out of suspicion. It was curiosity, the kind that didn't demand justification. I wasn't chosen, I said simply. He nodded, like that told him everything he needed to know. A few weeks later, I ran into my ex again. This time it was unavoidable. I was leaving a bookstore when I heard my name. He was standing near the entrance, hands shoved into his pockets, like he'd been there longer than coincidence allowed. Eliza, he said, I was hoping I'd see you. I didn't tense. That was new too. Hi, I replied. I won't take much of your time, he said quickly. I heard you moved. I did. He smiled faintly. I'm glad. There was a pause, the kind that used to make me rush to fill it. I didn't. I wanted to tell you, he continued. I moved out of the apartment. I'm staying closer to work now. That makes sense, I said. He hesitated. My parents and I aren't really talking. I searched his face for something. Regret, maybe. Or resentment. I found neither. I hope you're okay, I said, and I meant it. He looked surprised by that. You're different, he said quietly. So are you, I replied. That was true, but the difference mattered less now. I won't keep you, he said finally. It was good to see you. As he turned to leave, I felt no urge to stop him. No what-ifs, no ache. Just distance, clean and clear. That night, Evan cooked dinner at my place. Pasta, slightly overcooked, eaten straight from the pan because I still hadn't bought proper plates. You okay? He asked, noticing my quiet. Yeah, I said after a moment. I really am. He smiled and leaned in to kiss my cheek. No pressure, no claim, just warmth. As I fell asleep later, I realized something that startled me with its simplicity. I hadn't lost anything. I'd stepped out of a life where love was conditional and into one where it didn't have to be earned. Meeting Evan didn't feel like starting over. It felt like arriving. There was no moment where I woke up and thought, this is it. This is the new chapter. It happened quietly, the way real change usually does, through consistency, through small proofs that stacked up over time. He texted when he said he would. He showed up when he promised. He didn't flinch when I took up space. That last one surprised me the most. I was used to editing myself, softening opinions, swallowing reactions before they could become inconvenient. With Evan, I didn't have to do any of that. When I talked about work, he didn't look bored or intimidated. When I admitted I needed time, he didn't hear rejection. He heard honesty. One night, about 2 months in, he asked me something simple. "Are you seeing anyone else?" "No," I said. "Good," he replied, without possessiveness, without relief, just certainty. It hit me then. This was what it felt like to be chosen without negotiation. A few weeks later, he invited me to dinner at his parents' house. He said it casually, like it wasn't a test or a milestone, just part of life. "They've been asking about you," he said. "I talk about you a lot." My chest tightened out of habit. Old reflexes. "Are you sure?" I asked. "I don't want to intrude." He frowned. "Why would you be intruding?" The question caught me off guard. "I mean, if it's too soon—" "Eliza," he said gently, "if I didn't want you there, I wouldn't invite you." That should have been obvious, but it wasn't. Not to the version of me that had learned to expect hesitation. Dinner was on a Sunday. His parents' house was warm in that lived-in way that had nothing to do with money. Shoes by the door. A dog that insisted on greeting me like we were already friends. His mother hugged me within seconds of meeting me. His father asked about my work and actually listened to the answer. No comparisons, no subtle evaluations, no invisible checklist I had to pass. At one point, his mother leaned over and said, "Evan seems really happy." I smiled. "He is." "And you?" she asked. I didn't hesitate. "I am too." Driving home that night, Evan reached for my hand. "They like you," he said, amused. "I noticed," I replied, smiling softly. "I like that you didn't try to impress them." I didn't feel like I needed to. He glanced at me, something warm and steady in his expression. Good. A few days later, I got a message from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. "Hey, Eliza, it's me. I just wanted to let you know I'm moving to a different city. New job. Fresh start." I stared at the screen for a long moment. There was no spike of anxiety, no rush of memories, just information. "I hope you're happy," the message continued. "You deserve that." I typed back once. "I hope it works out for you. Take care." Then I deleted the thread. That night, Evan asked if I was okay. "Yeah," I said, "just closing a chapter." He nodded, didn't ask for details, didn't pry. He trusted me to bring things up when I was ready. Weeks passed, then months. I stopped thinking of my past as something that haunted me and started seeing it as something that had taught me. The warning signs I used to excuse now stood out clearly in hindsight. The silence I once accepted now felt loud when it appeared elsewhere. I was done confusing tolerance for love. One evening, Evan and I were lying on my couch, legs tangled, a movie playing neither of us was really watching. "You know," he said casually, "I never feel like I have to compete with anyone when I'm with you." I looked at him. "Why would you?" He shrugged. "Exactly." The simplicity of it nearly broke me. Not because it was painful, because it was kind. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't someone's secret. I wasn't someone's compromise. I wasn't someone they chose only when it was convenient. I was a first choice. And this time it didn't come with conditions. Peace didn't arrive all at once. It settled in slowly, the way quiet does after a storm, almost unnoticeable at first, until one day you realize you're no longer bracing for thunder. I used to think closure came from conversations, from apologies spoken out loud, from moments where someone finally admitted they were wrong and named every hurt they caused. Now I knew better. Closure came from consistency, from waking up without checking my phone, from making plans without wondering who might disapprove. It came from not needing to be understood by people who had already decided who I was. Evan never asked me to explain myself. That alone felt radical. One night, a few months into our relationship, we were cooking dinner together, music playing softly in the background, windows open to let the evening air in. He was chopping vegetables, completely focused, when he asked casually, "Do you ever miss him?" I paused, considering the question honestly. "No," I said. "I miss who I thought he was, but that person doesn't exist anymore." Evan nodded, accepting the answer without analysis or reassurance. That makes sense. There was no jealousy in his tone, no insecurity, just trust. A few weeks later, Leo told me something I hadn't expected. "He reached out," Leo said over coffee, "asked how you were." I felt nothing spike in my chest. No anger, no curiosity, just distance. "What did you say?" I asked. "That you're doing well," Leo replied, "and that I wasn't the messenger." "Good," I said. Leo smiled. "You've changed." "So have you," I said. "You stopped worrying about me." He laughed. "Fair. Life kept moving forward, not because I forced it to, but because I finally wasn't standing in its way. Evan and I didn't rush milestones. We didn't perform happiness for anyone else. There were no dramatic announcements, no carefully curated posts to prove anything. Just dinners that turned into late conversations, weekend mornings that stretched into afternoons. The quiet understanding that neither of us was waiting for the other to become someone else. One Sunday afternoon, while we were lying on the floor assembling a cheap bookshelf, Evan said, "My parents asked when they'll see you again." I smiled. "Tell them soon." "They already consider you family," he added, like it was the most natural thing in the world. The word family no longer made my shoulders tense. It felt earned this time. Not through endurance, not through silence, but through choice. That night, as we lay in bed, Evan turned to me and whispered, "I'm really happy you're here. Not with me, not in my life. Here, present, equal, wanted." I realized then that the most powerful thing I'd done wasn't leaving. It was believing I didn't have to apologize for needing more. I didn't need to prove my worth. I didn't need to outgrow someone else's expectations. I just needed to stop shrinking. And once I did, peace followed, naturally, quietly, without asking permission. The strange thing about healing is that you don't notice it while it's happening. There was no morning where I woke up and thought, "I'm healed now." No clear finish line, no triumphant moment. It revealed itself in small, ordinary ways, like the first time I walked past the old apartment building without slowing down, or the first time someone mentioned his name and my body didn't react at all, or the way I could tell the story now without needing to justify my choices. That was when I knew. Not because I'd won, but because I was free. Evan and I moved in together in the spring, not out of urgency, not out of fear of losing each other, just because it made sense. We were already sharing most nights, most meals, most of our lives. Making it official felt less like a leap and more like aligning the obvious. The place we chose wasn't impressive. Second floor walk-up, lots of natural light, a kitchen just big enough for two people who liked cooking together. We unpacked slowly, laughing at how many things we both owned twice, and how many things neither of us had bothered to buy before. When his parents came over for dinner the first time, I didn't prepare for it like a test. I didn't rehearse answers. I didn't choose my outfit strategically. I didn't brace myself for judgment. I just showed up as myself. Halfway through the meal, his father raised his glass and said, "I'm really glad Evan found you. Not ended up with, not settled for. Found." I smiled and said thank you and meant it. Later that night, Evan squeezed my hand and whispered, "Told you?" I thought back to the woman I'd been a year earlier, the one who'd sat at a dinner table being compared to someone else, the one who'd accepted silence as love and absence as patience. She had believed that if she just waited long enough, tried hard enough, proved herself enough, she would be chosen. She never realized she was auditioning for a role that was never hers. Walking away hadn't been dramatic. It hadn't been brave in the way movies like to portray it. It had simply been necessary. The last time I heard anything about my ex was through a mutual friend. He'd moved cities, started over, still trying to untangle himself from expectations that had never really been his. I felt no satisfaction hearing it, no bitterness, just distance, and that was the most honest ending we could have had. One night, months later, Evan and I were lying in bed, the room quiet except for the hum of traffic outside. "You awake?" he asked softly. "Yeah. What are you thinking about?" I considered the question, then answered truthfully. "How calm everything feels." He smiled in the dark. "Good calm?" "The best kind." He kissed my shoulder. "Me too." That was it. No tests, no comparisons, no fear of being replaced by a past that refused to stay in the past. I didn't hate the people who couldn't see my worth. I didn't need them to understand. Because the right life didn't require me to fight for space in it. It opened the door. It invited me in, and it chose me back.